Hey everyone, welcome to PT Snacks Podcast. This is Casey, your host. And if you're tuning in for the very first time, what you need to know is that this podcast is meant for physical therapists and physical therapist students who are looking to grow your fundamentals in bite-sized segments of time. Every once in a while, I think that it is very easy to get caught up in all the weeds of very specific diagnoses and what we're looking for. And we need to take a step back and be able to see what is the overarching thing that we're looking at so we can better understand why some tendons are more predisposed versus others, and if we should treat certain tendons differently or not. So we're going just very high level. Why do tendons get injured? Some more so than others. And then we utilize that information to get a better understanding of the causation so that we do our best to help that specific tendon recover to the best of its capabilities or have a prognosis on how well is this going to do with healing. That's it. Now, before we dive into today, if you've been listening to the show for at least 3 episodes and you feel like this has really been helpful to me, if you wouldn't mind just leaving a review wherever you do listen to the podcast, that would mean the world to me, because those really do help the show grow. But also, if you have any questions, I'll leave my contact information at the end here. So essentially diving into tendons, remember that tendons, they are really good at helping us to basically handle load. Now, different tendons in the body live in different neighborhoods depending on the environment that they're in and how they're structured. So, this can affect how they get their blood supply. What kind of load are they experiencing in our day to day? And then, what's their ability to adapt or not really adapt to the stress that we add to our body and those symptoms? So, these can all factor whether they maybe develop some sort of tendinopathy, whether it's a tendonitis or tendinosis, and or rupture, which don't really wish that upon anyone, but it does happen, right? So why do we care? Tendon injuries often happen if there's a mismatch between the load that we ask of it and the load that it's ready for. So with that mismatch, that could be something that is acute where it was way too much and maybe we experience a tendonitis, which is more of that acute response. We're seeing a lot of inflammatory components to it versus something that maybe we've done over time where we have progressed too quickly. While it may not be an obvious, yeah, that was a big jump, but something that we have to understand when we're asking our patients these questions on, is there a load mismatch and how do we get our loading right in the beginning to make sure that we're developing the long-term adaptations that have to happen to reach that patient's goals? They don't have a great blood supply, which can be a good thing, right? It helps the tendon to be able to do its job of transferring force through our body without requiring a lot of metabolic energy. But again, that does affect how quickly it is able to come back from injury too. So let's talk about why that mismatch in load can happen and why that could vary between different tendons. So we're talking about mechanical reasoning. One is overload and fatigue. So repetitive loading without enough recovery can cause enough micro damage to where that accumulates into failure. So naturally, tendons that experience a lot of force throughout the day, those are some where they are probably more just predisposed to developing this, right? And that also could depend on the person that's in front of you, what they do in their day to day. The load type and region can also be another factor. So tendons, they experience tension, compression, shear force, and region specific loading can drive local degeneration. And lastly, energy storing versus positional tendons. So, our more spring like, load bearing tendons, like our Achilles, often operate at a very high level of stress and are more prone to developing issues than more of our maybe positional tendons, things that kind of help hold us upright all day. So, that's from like a loading perspective, why we might see a mismatch, right? Now, someone's tissue quality can have an impact on how well those different tendons heal. If someone smokes or has some sort of comorbidity that does slow down the healing process or impede the healing process as a whole. Again, we're talking about something where recovery does not keep up with load. So if the recovery is already predisposed to a lower rate of healing, that person, while they might look like another person, they are probably a little bit more predisposed to the overload component just because one side of the factor is already at an imbalance. Okay? Other aspects too, if we're talking about the tendon junctions. So junctions between different tissues are more prone to failure because they connect with materials with different stiffness. So picture the osteotendinous junction between a tendon and a bone versus the musculotendinous junction, the tendon and the muscle. Those are very different tissues. And we see that with that difference in stress between those different tissues, that can cause a huge strain. So the enthesis can see about a 50-fold difference in resistance between an elastic tendon and a rigid bone. Those are spots where we can highlight maybe some issues with the tendons. Also, looking at the tendon sizes themselves. So if we're talking about tendons that have a small cross-section area, but a large attached muscle. So we'll talk about like the supraspinatus, for instance. They can have a higher force per area and more fatigue damage than regions that have a larger tendon cross-section area. So compare the supraspinatus to the subscapularis. Subscapularis has a very broad tendon attachment, so it's able to generate force across a larger surface area versus the supraspinatus. So that can have an impact as well on what tendons tend to get more prone to injury versus others. And I already mentioned high strain, energy storing tendons such as our Achilles. They are experiencing a higher amount of force, but they're also probably using that high amount of strain for a longer period of time than maybe some low strain tendons. So they may have less recovery time just from the proportion of time that it's being used versus not. Other components, the tendon specific composition. So I'm talking about things like the water content, glycosaminoglycans, their architecture, they can differ by location, function, and therefore create very different mechanical properties and vulnerabilities. Our systemic demographic factors, age, sex, race, obesity, connective tissue traits, those can all modify risk, but interact with the local mechanics of the particular tendons. Again, the likelihood of there being some sort of tendon-related injury. So again, recapping, that was a lot of facts just being spouted at you. We already understand why tendon injury can happen. So it would make sense for tendons that we are probably using more often with less recovery for them to already predispose. But tendon that has a smaller cross-section area that is attached to a larger muscle belly has to have a lot more stress going through that area. So it's naturally already being loaded more in relation to a muscle with a larger cross-section area of a tendon that is attaching to it. And then what is the quality of the tendon itself? All of these factors have a component of how much stress is being added to the tendon and how well it's being able to recover. Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper with intrasynovial versus extrasynovial tendons, because I think for me, that was a concept that didn't really make much sense. So when we're talking about intrasynovial, again, we're talking about the tendons are inside of a synovial sheath. A good example are our flexor tendons in our fingers. Those have a lower blood count and it's a low cell environment. So there's also just not that much space for scarring to happen with versus extrasynovial. That's outside of a synovial sheath. So our Achilles and our patellar tendon are two examples. It's more vascular. There's more organized collagen, higher oxidative phosphorylation enzyme levels, and more inflammation inhibitors. It's more likely to have a scar-mediated healing process that it goes through, though what it makes can be mechanically inferior. But it has a better healing capacity. So this kind of information can be helpful for building up expectations And also sharing this with your patient, understanding, hey, your friend who had this kind of tendon injury is not the same as your tendon injury. So I know this is more high level, but I get really excited about this because the more you understand why some of these things happen, it becomes less about just memorizing every single thing. And it helps with, as you're learning new information about these things, being able to fit it into a framework that helps you to think under pressure and also be able to better improve your craft rather than I memorize this, now I've got 50 different facts in my head that don't interconnect with each other. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out at ptsnackspodcast@gmail.com. I love hearing your suggestions and what you're interested in learning more of. I really do. I read all of those emails and comments and reviews, things like that. So uh, that being said, if you want to take deeper dives, I've been on TikTok more recently, posting up some I've been posting some content essentially that just makes it a little easier to study, just little tidbits here and there as well. So if you're on TikTok, go ahead and find me. It's PT Snacks Podcast. I also have a newsletter where you can sign up and get news, basically some updates on the episodes that are coming out and some other stuff. And for today too, if you want to download it's free. It's like a little study sheet guide. Just go in the show notes and you can download it there. But if you are trying to just take deeper dives in general, MedBridge is actually having a very special month this month because in June, they are celebrating their 15th year anniversary. And if you don't know who MedBridge is, it's a huge continuing education company that has thousands of CEU courses for PTs, PT students, PTAs, also other specialties. But they've got courses, they've got free webinars. They also have specialty exam prep courses that are available. I used it for my OCS, so good to practice that eye fatigue on the screen. But just find out more in the show notes on how you can get an even better discount than normal. And we'll just keep on going from there. But have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time.